The morning sky over the Solomon Islands stretches endlessly, painted in shades of pale blue and grey. It's August 1943, and the Pacific War has been grinding on for nearly 2 years. Down below, the jungle-covered islands seem peaceful from this altitude, but everyone knows better. This is a war zone, contested inch by bloody inch between American forces and the Imperial Japanese military. And up here, at 15,000 feet, 4 American pilots are about to face a test that will either prove their worth or end their lives in a matter of minutes. Lieutenant James Caldwell grips the stick of his F-4F Wildcat fighter, feeling the aircraft vibrate beneath him. The engine's steady roar fills his cockpit, a sound that's become as familiar as his own heartbeat over the past 8 months. At 24 years old, Jim has already seen more combat than most men see in a lifetime. His hands, calloused from countless hours at the controls, rest steady despite the tension coiling in his gut. He knows what's coming. The intelligence reports were clear this morning during the pre-dawn briefing. Japanese fighters have been spotted operating in this sector, and command expects contact within the hour. If you're enjoying this story of courage and tactical brilliance in the skies over the Pacific, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more incredible true stories from World War II. Your support helps us bring these forgotten heroes back to life. Jim glances to his left, where his wingman, Ensign Tommy Reeves, maintains formation. Tommy is young, just 21, with the kind of boyish face that makes him look even younger. He's only been in the squadron for 6 weeks, but he's shown promise. His Wildcat stays exactly where it should be, maintaining proper spacing. Good. They'll need that discipline today. On his right, slightly higher, fly Lieutenant Marcus Webb and his wingman, Ensign Danny Kozlowski. Marcus is the oldest of them at 29, a former crop duster from Iowa who took to military flying like he was born for it. Danny, compact and dark-haired, came from a Polish neighborhood in Chicago and has the kind of nervous energy that either makes a man crack under pressure or turn into a tiger in a fight. The 4 Wildcats drone through the morning air, their mission simple on paper but complex in execution. They're flying combat air patrol over the channel between Guadalcanal and the Russell Islands, protecting Allied shipping from Japanese air attacks. The Wildcat isn't the newest fighter in the American arsenal. That honor goes to the sleeker, faster F-6F Hellcat, now beginning to appear in the fleet. The Wildcat is older, slower, less maneuverable than the Japanese Zero fighters they'll face. But it's what they have, and they've learned to make it work. Jim's radio crackles to life. Raptor flight, this is Guardian Control. We have multiple bogies inbound your sector, bearing 270, range 15 miles. Count shows 8 to 10 aircraft, altitude Angels 14. They're coming in fast. Jim keys his radio. Guardian Control, Raptor leader copies. We have visual on the search sector, maintaining patrol altitude. His heart rate picks up slightly, but his hands remain steady. This is it. 8 to 10 Japanese fighters means they're outnumbered at least 2 to 1. The smart play would be to call for reinforcements and climb for altitude advantage. But Jim knows the math. By the time help arrives, those Japanese fighters will be over the convoy below, wreaking havoc on the transport ships carrying supplies and reinforcements to the Marines holding the islands. Those ships have minimal anti-aircraft defense. Without air cover, they're sitting ducks. Raptor flight, close it up. We're going to need to work together on this one. Jim's voice is calm, controlled. He learned early in his combat career that panic spreads faster than fire through a formation. Stay calm, stay focused, and your wingman will follow your lead. Raptor 3, copy. That's Marcus, his voice carrying the gravelly tone of a man who's been smoking too many cigarettes between missions. Raptor 2, roger. Tommy sounds nervous, but he's holding it together. Raptor 4, understood. Danny's voice is tight, controlled. Jim scans the western horizon, his eyes trained by months of combat to pick out the tiny specks of approaching aircraft against the sky. There, A glint of sunlight on metal, then another and another. He counts quickly. 9 aircraft in a loose formation, coming in fast and high. As they draw closer, he can make out the distinctive silhouette. A6M0 fighters, Japan's premier naval fighter. Fast, maneuverable, deadly in the hands of experienced pilots. And these pilots, this deep into the war, are likely veterans who've survived months or years of combat. The Americans have one significant advantage. The Wildcat, while slower and less maneuverable, is built like a tank. It can take punishment that would tear a Zero apart. The Zero is light, which gives it incredible agility, but that lightness comes at a cost. No armor plating for the pilot, no self-sealing fuel tanks. If you can land solid hits on a Zero, it goes down. The trick is landing those hits when the Zero can turn inside your circle and get on your tail before you can react. But Jim has been thinking about this problem for months. He studied after-action reports, talked to every pilot who's fought Zeros, and lived to tell about it. And he's developed a tactic, a doctrine really, that he's been drilling into his squadron at every opportunity. Now facing 9 Zeros with just 4 Wildcats, it's time to put theory into practice. Raptor Flight, listen up. We're going to use the Thatch weave. Marcus, you and Danny are Charlie team. Tommy and I are Alpha. We maintain mutual support at all times. Nobody goes chasing Zeros alone. We weave, we cover each other's tails, and we make them pay for every mistake. Remember your discipline. Remember your training. The Thatch weave, named after Lieutenant Commander John Thatch, who developed it, is a defensive tactic that turns the Wildcats' weaknesses into strengths. Instead of trying to outturn the more agile Zeros, 2 pairs of fighters fly parallel courses, weaving back and forth across each other's paths. When a Zero gets on one Wildcat's tail, that pilot turns toward his partner. The partner, seeing the Zero in pursuit, has a clear shot at the enemy fighter's exposed flank. It requires iron discipline, perfect timing, and absolute trust between pilots. But it works. Jim has seen it work. He's used it to survive encounters that should have killed him. The Zeros are closing fast now, and Jim can see them beginning to spread out, preparing to attack. They're coming in with an altitude advantage, diving down from 16,000 feet. Classic tactics. Use the dive to build speed, make a high-speed pass, then use their superior maneuverability to get on the Americans' tails. Raptor Flight. Break by pairs. Marcus, take Danny and go port. We're going starboard. Execute now. Jim banks his Wildcat hard to the right, feeling the G-forces press him down into his seat. Tommy follows perfectly, maintaining position. Behind them, Marcus and Danny break left. The 4 Wildcats are now flying diverging courses, creating space and confusion for the attacking Zeros. The Japanese fighters commit to their attack, and Jim watches as they split into 2 groups. 5 Zeros peel off to pursue his pair, while 4 go after Marcus and Danny. Good. The numbers are still bad, but at least they're not all concentrated in one place. The lead Zero comes screaming down in a steep dive, closing the range with frightening speed. Jim can see the muzzle flashes as the Japanese pilot opens fire and tracers arc through the air toward him. He doesn't flinch. Not yet. Wait for it. Wait. At the last possible second, Jim hauls the Wildcat into a hard left turn, directly toward where Marcus and Danny should be. The Zero overshoots, its pilot pulling up hard to avoid collision. That moment of hesitation, that break in the attack, is what Jim needed. Tommy, hold your course, I'm coming across. Jim's Wildcat crosses in front of Tommy's flight path, and the 2 aircraft execute the first weave of the engagement. The second Zero, following its leader, suddenly finds itself exposed as it tries to turn with Jim. Tommy, seeing the opportunity, rolls slightly and fires a burst. His .50 caliber machine guns hammer out a stream of bullets, and Jim sees pieces fly off the Zero's wing. The Japanese fighter breaks away, trailing a thin stream of smoke. Good shoot in Raptor 2. Stay with me. But there's no time to celebrate. The remaining 4 Zeros in their group are already repositioning, and these pilots are smart. They've seen the Thatch weave before, and they're trying to counter it by splitting up, attacking from multiple angles simultaneously. Jim's radio crackles. "Raptor leader, Raptor 3, we've got 4 on us over here, they're pressing hard. Copy, 3, maintain the weave, we're working our way over to you." Easier said than done. Jim has 3 Zeros circling around him, and Tommy like sharks around wounded prey. Every time he tries to change course toward Marcus and Danny, the Zeros cut him off, forcing him into defensive maneuvers. This is the nightmare scenario, being outnumbered and separated, but Jim keeps his head. Panic kills. Discipline saves lives. "Tommy, listen to me carefully. We're going to execute a high-speed scissors. On my mark, you're going to brake hard left while I brake right. We'll cross paths, reverse, and cross again. The Zeros will try to follow, but their closure rate is too high. They'll overshoot. When they do, we nail them. You ready?" "Ready as I'll ever be, Skipper." Tommy's voice shakes slightly, but he's in position. "Execute now. Hard left, full throttle." The 2 Wildcats break in opposite directions, their paths crossing like the blades of scissors. The Zeros, committed to their attack, try to follow. But Jim has calculated correctly. At this speed, with the Wildcats turning toward each other, the closing rate is too fast. The Zeros can't react quickly enough. 1 Zero flashes past Jim's nose, so close he can see the pilot's face behind the canopy glass. Jim reverses his turn, standing the Wildcat on its wing, and the Zero is suddenly directly in front of him, range less than 200 yards. He squeezes the trigger, and all 6 machine guns roar. 50 caliber bullets tear into the Zero's fuselage, walking up from tail to cockpit. The Japanese fighter shudders, smoke pours from its engine, and it rolls over into a death dive. "Scratch one." Jim keeps his voice calm, but inside, relief floods through him. That's one less threat to worry about. Tommy's voice comes through, excited and terrified at once. "I got one smoking, but there's another on my tail. I can't shake him." Jim looks up and sees the situation instantly. A Zero is locked onto Tommy's tail, closing for the kill. Tommy is doing everything right, jinking and weaving, but the Zero pilot is good, staying with him through every maneuver. In a few more seconds, he'll be in gun range, and Tommy's Wildcat will be torn apart. "Tommy, brake left, hard left, now!" Tommy responds instantly, hauling his fighter into a gut-wrenching turn. The Zero follows, but in doing so it crosses directly in front of Jim's guns. Jim doesn't hesitate. He fires a long burst, and the stream of tracers converges on the Zero's cockpit. The canopy shatters, and the fighter snap-rolls to the right, completely out of control. It spirals down, trailing fire. "Thanks, Skipper. I owe you one." "Stay focused, Tommy. We're not done yet." But they've turned the tide. Of the 5 Zeros that attacked them, 2 are down, 1 is damaged and fleeing, and the remaining 2 are being more cautious now, circling at a distance, looking for an opening that Jim refuses to give them. Jim checks his position and sees that he's managed to work his way closer to where Marcus and Danny are fighting. He can see them in the distance, 2 Wildcats weaving back and forth, with 4 Zeros dancing around them. Even at this distance, he can tell the fight is desperate. Tracers arc through the air in both directions. One of the Wildcats is trailing a thin stream of smoke. "Raptor 3, Raptor leader, we're coming to you, hold on." "About damn time." Marcus's voice is strained. Danny's hit, his engine's running rough, and he's losing oil pressure. Jim's jaw tightens. A Wildcat with a damaged engine is a sitting duck against nimble Zeros. They need to end this fight quickly and get Danny back to base before his engine seizes up completely. "Tommy, we're going in, full throttle." We hit them from the side while they're focused on Marcus and Danny. Don't get fancy, just get in, take your shots, and get out. The 2 Wildcats accelerate, diving slightly to build speed. The 2 Zeros that had been circling them try to follow, but Jim ignores them. Right now, helping Marcus and Danny is the priority. As they close in, Jim can see the tactical situation more clearly. The 4 Zeros have split into 2 pairs, each pair working together to try to get behind Marcus and Danny. It's smart tactics, and it's working. Marcus and Danny are being forced into increasingly desperate maneuvers to avoid being caught. Jim picks his target, a Zero pulling up from a diving attack on Danny. The Japanese pilot is focused entirely on his target, unaware that Jim is coming in from his 4 o'clock. Range closes rapidly, 500 yards, 400, 300. Jim squeezes the trigger, the 6 machine guns roar, and he sees his tracers walking across the Zero's fuselage. The Japanese fighter's tail section disintegrates, and the aircraft tumbles out of the sky like a broken toy. The attack catches the Japanese pilots by surprise. Suddenly, instead of 4 against 2, it's 4 against 4, and the Americans have the initiative. Marcus sees the opportunity and presses his attack, closing on a Zero that's trying to reverse course. His guns stutter out a burst, and the Zero's left wing folds up. The fighter spins violently to the left and plunges toward the ocean below, but the Japanese pilots aren't giving up. The remaining 3 Zeros regroup and come back around, and now it's a furious dogfight. 4 Wildcats and 3 Zeros circling and weaving in a tangled ball of aircraft. Jim loses track of individual aircraft. Everything is instinct and reaction now. Turn, fire, brake, check your tail, find a target, fire again. He gets a snapshot at a Zero crossing in front of him and fires, but the Japanese pilot breaks away before he can assess the damage. A moment later, tracers flash past his canopy from above, and he pulls into a gut-wrenching turn to evade. His vision grays at the edges from the G-forces, but he holds the turn, knowing that if he relaxes for even a second, he's dead. Raptor 4 is Winchester. I'm out of ammo. Danny's voice is tight with stress and pain. Raptor 4, break off and head for home. We'll cover you. Jim keys his radio even as he's lining up another shot. Danny's smoking Wildcat peels away from the fight, limping toward the east and safety. One of the Zeros moves to pursue him, but Marcus cuts across its path, forcing it to break off. The Zero pulls up sharply, and Jim is there, above and behind it. He fires a burst that tears into the Zero's engine. Black smoke erupts, and the fighter rolls over and dives away. The 2 remaining Zeros seem to realize that the fight has turned against them. They break off, diving away to the west at full throttle. Jim's first instinct is to pursue, but he checks himself. Rule number 1 of the Thatch Weave doctrine: never break formation to chase a single enemy. That's how you get separated and killed. Let them go. Raptor flight, form up on me. Let's get Danny home. The 3 remaining Wildcats join up, forming a protective triangle around Danny's damaged fighter. His engine is smoking heavily now, and Jim can see oil streaking back along the fuselage. It's a miracle the engine is still running at all. They fly east, away from the combat zone, toward the relative safety of Henderson Field on Guadalcanal. Every minute feels like an hour. Jim keeps scanning the sky, watching for more enemy fighters. But the sky remains clear. The Japanese have pulled back, at least for now. Danny's voice comes over the radio, weak and shaky. Engine temperature is redlining. I don't know if I can make it back. You're going to make it, Danny. Just keep that throttle steady and don't make any sudden moves. We're only 10 minutes out. Jim doesn't mention that if Danny's engine seizes up over the ocean, his chances of survival are slim. The waters around Guadalcanal are full of sharks, and the current is strong. But there's nothing to be gained from voicing those fears. Better to focus on what they can control. The coastline of Guadalcanal appears ahead, a dark green line against the blue of the ocean. Henderson Field is visible now, a brown scar cut through the jungle with a single runway running north-south. Jim can see a dozen or more aircraft parked on the hardstands and vehicles moving along the perimeter road. Raptor flight, this is Henderson Tower. We have you on approach. Raptor 4, are you declaring an emergency? Henderson, Raptor leader. Affirmative, Raptor 4 has severe engine damage. He's going to need a straight-in approach. Clear the deck. Copy, Raptor leader. All aircraft, clear the pattern. We have an emergency inbound. Danny brings his Wildcat in low and slow, nursing the dying engine. Black smoke is pouring from the cowling now, and Jim can see flames starting to lick out around the exhaust manifold. Come on, Danny, just a little further. The Wildcat crosses the threshold of the runway, and Danny cuts the throttle. The fighter drops the last few feet and hits the runway hard, bouncing once, then settling down. The wounded aircraft rolls for several hundred yards before finally coming to a stop. Danny cuts the engine and the propeller windmills to a stop. Ground crew race out with fire extinguishers, but Danny is already climbing out of the cockpit, moving fast despite his injuries. Jim circles the field and brings his own Wildcat in for a landing, followed by Tommy and Marcus. By the time he's taxied to his hardstand and shut down his engine, the adrenaline is starting to wear off, replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion. He sits in the cockpit for a long moment, hands trembling slightly now that the fight is over. His crew chief, a grizzled sergeant named Wilson, climbs up on the wing. "How'd she handle, Lieutenant?" "Like a dream, Wilson. Take good care of her. We're going to need her again tomorrow." Jim climbs down from the cockpit and walks on shaky legs toward the debriefing area, a converted supply tent near the operations center. Tommy and Marcus are already there, sitting on wooden crates and smoking cigarettes with the kind of desperate intensity of men who've just escaped death. Danny is there too, his flight suit soaked with sweat and oil, but he's grinning. "Hell of a fight, Skipper. Hell of a fight." The intelligence officer, a young lieutenant named Peterson, sits down with a notebook and starts taking their reports. How many enemy aircraft did they encounter? What types? What tactics did the enemy use? What tactics did the Americans use? How many confirmed kills? How many probables? Jim answers the questions mechanically, his mind still processing the fight. 4 Wildcats against 9 Zeros. By all rights, they should have been slaughtered. But they came out ahead. 2 Zeros definitely destroyed by Jim, 1 by Marcus, 1 by Tommy. 3 more damaged, possibly destroyed. No American losses, though Danny's Wildcat will need a complete engine replacement. The intelligence officer looks up from his notes, impressed. 4 against 9, and you came out on top. That's going to make one hell of a report for command. Jim shakes his head. It wasn't about being better pilots or having better aircraft. It was about tactics. We stayed disciplined, we worked together, and we didn't give them any easy targets. That's all. But even as he says it, Jim knows it's more than that. They were lucky. Lucky that the Zero pilots didn't have more experienced leadership. Lucky that Danny's engine held together long enough to get him home. Lucky in 100 small ways that could have gone differently. That night, lying in his cot in the officer's tent, Jim can't sleep. Every time he closes his eyes, he sees the fight playing out again. The Zeros diving down, tracers filling the air, the Zero pilot's face as Jim shot him down. War is full of moments like these, frozen in memory, impossible to forget. Tommy is in the cot next to him, snoring softly. The kid did well today, followed orders, kept his head, and got his first kill. He'll be all right if he survives long enough to gain more experience. That's the cruel mathematics of aerial combat. The first few missions are the most dangerous. If you survive those, your odds get better, but that's a big if. Marcus is sitting outside the tent, smoking and staring up at the stars. Jim gets up and joins him, and for a while, neither of them speaks. Finally, Marcus breaks the silence. "You know what scares me most about today? How easy it was to kill those men. I didn't even think about it in the moment, just lined up the shot and pulled the trigger. Does that make us monsters?" Jim considers the question carefully. "We're fighting a war we didn't start. Those Japanese pilots would have killed us without hesitation if they'd had the chance. would have gone on to bomb the convoy, killing sailors and marines who never had a chance to defend themselves. We did our jobs. That's all. But where does it end? How many men have to die before someone decides enough is enough? Jim has no answer for that. The war will end when it ends. Until then, they fly, they fight, and they try to survive another day. The next morning, Jim is awakened by the sound of aircraft engines warming up. He rolls out of his cot, pulls on his flight suit, and stumbles outside into the grey pre-dawn light. Henderson Field is already a hive of activity. Mechanics working on aircraft, ordnance crews loading bombs and ammunition, pilots getting briefed for the day's missions. The tropical heat is already building, and Jim can feel sweat beginning to soak through his undershirt. The smell of aviation fuel, hot metal, and jungle vegetation fills the air. It's a smell he's become intimately familiar with over the past months, one that will probably stay with him for the rest of his life. Jim finds Danny standing next to a replacement Wildcat, his arm in a sling, but otherwise looking healthy. The left side of his face is bruised where he hit the canopy frame during yesterday's violent maneuvering, but his eyes are clear and focused. "I thought they grounded you," Jim says, walking over to inspect the new aircraft. Danny grins. "They tried. I told them if they wanted to ground me, they'd have to tie me down. Besides, my regular bird will be ready in a few days. I can fly this one until then." Jim runs his hand along the Wildcat's wing, feeling the rivets and the slight roughness of the paint. This particular aircraft is older than most, with patches on the fuselage where battle damage has been repaired. Someone has painted a small cartoon Wildcat on the nose, teeth bared in a snarl. It's become a tradition among the pilots, these small acts of personalization that make the machines feel less like tools and more like companions. "How's the arm?" Jim asks. Danny flexes his fingers, wincing slightly. "Doc says it's just a bad sprain. I can still work the stick, and that's all that matters. Besides, sitting around while you guys are up there isn't an option. I'd go crazy." Jim understands. The waiting is often harder than the fighting. When you're in the cockpit when things are happening, there's no time to think about fear or doubt. But on the ground, waiting for the next mission, that's when the mind starts playing tricks. That's when you start thinking about all the ways you could die, all the mistakes you could make. Tommy joins them, looking tired but determined. He's carrying a mug of coffee that's probably more grounds than liquid, but he drinks it anyway. The coffee on Henderson Field is notoriously bad, made from beans that have been sitting in supply crates for months, but it's hot and it has caffeine, and that's what matters. "Morning, Skipper. We flying today?" Jim nods. "Combat air patrol over the convoy route, same as yesterday. Intel says the Japanese are going to try again. They can't let those supply ships through without putting up a fight." Marcus appears from the operations tent, a cigarette dangling from his lips. He looks like he hasn't slept, and Jim suspects he spent most of the night in the same spot where he'd been sitting when Jim finally went to bed. "Briefing in 10 minutes, Marcus says. "Major wants to see us first, though. Says it's important." The 4 pilots walk together to the operations tent, their boots crunching on the coral gravel that covers most of the base. The tent is crowded with pilots, navigators, and intelligence officers, all studying maps and weather reports. The walls are covered with charts showing Japanese aircraft types, recognition silhouettes, and tactical diagrams. Major Hartman is there, along with the squadron commander, a lieutenant commander named Bradley, who's been flying fighters since before the war started. Bradley is a quiet man, competent but not flashy, the kind of officer who leads by example rather than speeches. "Gentlemen," Bradley begins, his voice carrying despite the noise in the tent. "Yesterday's engagement was a textbook example of proper tactics. 4 against 9, and we came out ahead. That's exactly the kind of performance we need. Major Hartman is here to observe and document our methods, and I want you to cooperate fully with him." Major Hartman steps forward. I'm not here to get in your way or second-guess your decisions. I'm here to learn. What you men did yesterday was remarkable, and Command wants to understand exactly how you did it, so we can teach it to every fighter pilot in the Pacific. So I'll be flying with you when possible, watching your briefings and debriefings, and asking a lot of questions. Lieutenant Caldwell, I'd like to start with you. Over the next hour, Jim walks the Major through every decision he made during the fight. Why he chose to split the formation, why he maintained the weave despite being outnumbered, how he judged when to break off and when to press the attack. The Major takes extensive notes, asking detailed questions about timing, spacing, communication. The key, Jim explains, is never giving them a clean shot. The Zero is more maneuverable, so if you try to turn with them, they'll get on your tail and you're dead. But if you're always moving across your wingman's line of fire, the enemy has to choose. Do they stay on your tail and get shot by your wingman, or do they break off and lose their advantage? Either way, we win. But it requires incredible discipline, the Major observes. One pilot breaks formation to chase a kill, and the whole thing falls apart. That's why we drill it constantly. Every pilot in this squadron knows that if they break formation without orders, they're done. No excuses, no second chances. It sounds harsh, but it's the only way to make this work. The briefing for the day's mission is straightforward. 4 Wildcats on combat air patrol, maintaining station over the convoy route. Rules of engagement are simple. Protect the ships. Engage enemy aircraft as necessary. Return to base when fuel reaches reserve levels. It's the same mission they've flown dozens of times, but Jim knows that familiarity breeds complacency, and complacency kills. Remember, he tells his pilots as they walk to their aircraft, every mission is different. The Japanese learn from their mistakes just like we do. They know about the Thatch weave now. They're going to try to counter it. Stay alert, stay disciplined, and don't assume anything. The 4 Wildcats take off in pairs, Tommy on Jim's wing, Danny on Marcus's. They climb to 15,000 feet, the engines straining slightly in the thin air. Below them, the convoy is a cluster of grey shapes moving slowly across the blue water. 6 transport ships, escorted by 2 destroyers, precious cargo heading to Guadalcanal, food, ammunition, spare parts, mail from home, the lifeblood of the campaign. The patrol is quiet for the first hour. Jim watches the horizon, scans the sky above and below, checks his instruments, the routine of combat flying. His throat is dry, and he wishes he'd brought more water, but there's no help for that now. The sun beats down through the canopy, turning the cockpit into an oven. Sweat runs down his face, stinging his eyes. Then the radio crackles. Raptor flight, Guardian control. Multiple bogies inbound. Bearing 310, range 20 miles. Count shows 12 aircraft, altitude angels 16. They're in 2 groups, 6 aircraft each. Jim feels his heart rate pick up. 12 aircraft, even worse odds than yesterday, but the convoy needs protection, and they're the only fighters in range. Guardian control, Raptor leader copies. We're moving to intercept. He looks over at Tommy, who gives him a thumbs up. Good kid. Scared, probably, but holding it together. That's all anyone can ask. Raptor flight, we're going to use the same tactics as yesterday. Stay in pairs, maintain the weave, make them pay for every mistake. If things get too hot, we fall back toward the convoy. The destroyers have anti-aircraft guns that can help us out if we need it. The Japanese aircraft appear on the horizon, 2 distinct groups flying in loose formation. As they get closer, Jim can identify them. 6 Zeros in the lead group, and 6 more following about a mile behind. They're learning, splitting their forces to try to overwhelm the defenders. Raptor flight, here's what we're going to do. Marcus, you and Danny take the second group. Keep them busy, make them chase you, but don't get decisively engaged. Tommy and I will hit the first group. When we break them up, we'll come help you with the second group. Questions? None here, Skipper. Marcus sounds calm, ready. The first group of Zeros comes in fast, diving down from altitude. Jim recognizes the tactic. High-speed pass, try to get behind the Americans before they can react. But Jim isn't going to play that game. Raptor flight, execute separation now. Marcus, go port. Tommy, stay with me, we're going starboard. The 4 Wildcats split, and the lead group of Zeros commits to pursuing Jim and Tommy, 6 against 2. The math is terrible, but Jim has a plan. The key is to drag this fight out, make the Japanese pilots work for every advantage, and wait for them to make mistakes. Sooner or later they will. They always do. The lead Zero opens fire from long range, and Jim watches the tracers arc toward him. Too far. The pilot is impatient, wasting ammunition. Jim ignores it and continues his turn, bringing Tommy across his tail in the first weave of the engagement. A Zero tries to follow Jim through the turn and suddenly finds itself facing Tommy's guns. Tommy fires a burst and the Zero breaks hard left, trailing smoke. It's not a kill, but it's damage, and a damaged fighter is less dangerous than a healthy one. Good shooting, Tommy. Stay with me. We're going to make them chase us in circles until they run out of patience. For the next several minutes, Jim and Tommy execute a perfect demonstration of the Thatch weave. Every time a Zero gets close to either of them, the other pilot is there with his guns ready. The Japanese pilots are good, experienced, but they're frustrated. They can't get a clean shot, and every time they press their attack, they expose themselves to fire. Jim gets another opportunity, a Zero pulling up in front of him after overshooting Tommy. He fires a long burst, and this time he sees pieces fly off the Zero's tail. The fighter wobbles, then spins out of control. The pilot doesn't bail out. Jim watches it fall until it hits the ocean in a spray of white water. But the fight is taking its toll. Jim's arms ache from the constant maneuvering. His flight suit is soaked with sweat. His mouth is so dry he can barely swallow, and they're burning through fuel at an alarming rate. All this violent maneuvering consumes gas much faster than straight and level flight. Raptor 3, Raptor leader. How are you doing over there? Marcus's voice comes back strained. We're holding them off, but it's getting dicey. Danny's still got engine problems, and I'm down to about 30 minutes of fuel. Jim checks his own fuel gauge and curses silently. He's got maybe 40 minutes left, and that's cutting it close for getting back to Henderson Field. But they can't leave yet. The convoy is still vulnerable, and if they pull out now, the Japanese will go after the ships. A jeep pulls up, and an officer climbs out, a major Jim doesn't recognize. The major walks over and Jim comes to attention and salutes. The major returns the salute casually. Lieutenant Caldwell, I'm Major Hartman, 5th Fighter Command. I've been reading the after-action reports from yesterday's engagement. 4 Wildcats against 9 Zeros, and you came out ahead. Command is very interested in your tactics. Jim feels a flush of pride mixed with unease. We just did our job, sir. Used the Thatch weave like we were trained. I've seen plenty of pilots who were trained in the Thatch weave, Lieutenant. Most of them don't have the discipline to execute it properly under fire. You and your men did. That's why I'm here. Command wants me to observe your squadron in action, document your tactics, and help spread them to other units. We're losing too many pilots who try to dogfight Zeros on the enemy's terms. Your approach is exactly what we need more of. Over the following weeks, Jim and his squadron fly mission after mission, each one a test of skill and nerve. They encounter Japanese fighters on nearly every patrol, and each time they use the tactics that kept them alive on that first engagement. Stay disciplined, work in pairs, protect each other. Make the enemy fight on your terms, not theirs. The pattern becomes familiar but never routine. Morning briefings in the operations tent, studying reconnaissance photos and intelligence reports. The walk to the aircraft, checking every control surface, every instrument, the engine start. That moment when the big radial roars to life and the whole aircraft shakes with barely controlled power. The takeoff, lifting away from the coral runway and climbing into the tropical sky. And then the hunting. Sometimes they find the enemy quickly, sometimes they patrol for hours, seeing nothing but ocean and clouds. But when they do make contact, the tactics that Jim drilled into his men prove their worth again and again. In the third week of September, they encounter a formation of 8 Zeros escorting a group of Japanese bombers heading for the convoy routes. Jim makes the call immediately. Ignore the bombers for now, take out the escort first. Without fighter protection, the bombers are sitting ducks. The engagement is brief and brutal. Jim and Marcus work as a team, weaving through the Zero formation, disrupting their cohesion. Tommy and Danny follow their lead, providing mutual support, never leaving each other exposed. Within 5 minutes, 3 Zeros are down, 2 more are damaged and fleeing, and the remaining 3 break off to protect themselves. The bombers, seeing their escort shattered, turn back without even attempting their attack. Mission accomplished. The convoy sails on unmolested, delivering its precious cargo to the Marines fighting on Guadalcanal. The victories add up. Jim gets his 3rd, 4th, and 5th confirmed kills. Tommy becomes an ace with 5 kills of his own. Marcus adds 3 more to his tally. Danny, despite his wounded arm, shoots down 2 more Zeros. Word spreads through the fighter squadrons operating in the Solomon Islands. The Wildcat pilots at Henderson Field are doing something right, and other units start adopting their tactics. Major Hartman stays with them for 3 weeks, flying as an observer in a 2-seat trainer, watching how they operate. He fills notebook after notebook with observations and diagrams. When he finally leaves to return to command headquarters, he shakes Jim's hand and tells him, "You've changed how we fight this war, Lieutenant. Your tactics are going to save a lot of lives." Jim doesn't know if he believes that. All he knows is that he and his men are still alive, still flying, still fighting, and in this war, that's as close to victory as anyone can hope for. The missions continue through October and into November. The Japanese are becoming more cautious, their attacks less frequent but more carefully planned. They've learned to respect the Wildcat formations, to avoid engaging unless they have overwhelming numerical superiority or tactical advantage. This is itself a victory of sorts. An enemy that fears you is an enemy that makes mistakes. But the war is taking its toll. New pilots arrive to replace losses in other squadrons. Young men, fresh from training, their eyes wide with a mixture of excitement and fear. Jim sees himself in them, remembers how green he was when he first arrived. It feels like a lifetime ago, though it's been less than a year. He takes the new pilots aside when he can, shares what he's learned. The aircraft doesn't matter as much as you think it does. The Zero is faster and more maneuverable, yes. But it's also fragile. A few good hits and it comes apart. Your Wildcat can take punishment and keep flying. Use that. And never, ever fly alone. Your wingman is your lifeline. Protect him and he'll protect you. Some of them listen, some don't. The ones who don't tend to die quickly. It's a harsh education, but war is a harsh teacher. In early November, Jim leads a mission that will become one of his most memorable. Intelligence reports indicate a major Japanese airstrike being prepared at their base on Buganville. Multiple squadrons of bombers and fighters planning a massive attack on Henderson Field itself. The American response is to strike first, to catch the Japanese aircraft on the ground before they can launch. Jim's flight is assigned as top cover for the attack force. 16 dive bombers and 12 torpedo bombers, escorted by 8 Wildcats. It's the largest mission Jim has flown, and the stakes couldn't be higher. If they fail, if the Japanese get their strike force into the air, Henderson Field could be devastated. They fly out in the pre-dawn darkness, navigating by stars and dead reckoning. As the sun rises, Jim can see the Japanese airfield ahead. A brown scar cut into the jungle of Buganville. And on that airfield, lined up in neat rows, are dozens of aircraft, bombers, fighters, reconnaissance planes, a target-rich environment. The dive bombers go in first, screaming down from altitude, their sirens wailing. Jim watches as bombs explode across the airfield, turning parked aircraft into balls of fire. Then the torpedo bombers come in low, strafing the dispersal areas with their machine guns. It's brutal, efficient, and devastatingly effective, but the Japanese aren't helpless. Anti-aircraft guns open up, filling the sky with black puffs of exploding shells. And from the far end of the airfield, a handful of Zeros manage to get airborne, climbing desperately to engage the attackers. Raptor flight. We've got bandits launching from the field, 3 Zeros climbing through 5,000 feet. Tommy, you're with me. Marcus, Danny, stay high and cover the bombers. Jim rolls his Wildcat into a dive, building speed, heading straight for the climbing Zeros. Tommy follows, his aircraft perfectly positioned. The Zeros see them coming and split up, trying to use their superior maneuverability to evade. But Jim has the altitude advantage and the speed advantage, and he presses his attack ruthlessly. He gets the lead Zero in his sights and fires. The burst is perfectly aimed, walking from the Zero's cockpit back along the fuselage. The Japanese fighter shudders, smoke pours from its engine, and it rolls over and crashes into the jungle below. Tommy gets the second Zero, catching it in a climbing turn and tearing off its left wing with a concentrated burst of fire. The third Zero, seeing its companions destroyed, doesn't even try to fight. It dives away at full throttle, running for its life. The bombing raid is a complete success. 37 Japanese aircraft destroyed on the ground, the airfield cratered and unusable, fuel storage tanks burning. American losses are minimal, 2 bombers damaged, but able to make it back to base. It's a crushing blow to Japanese air power in the region, one that will take them weeks or months to recover from. As they fly back to Henderson Field, Jim feels a grim satisfaction. This is what air superiority looks like. The ability to strike the enemy where they're vulnerable, to destroy their aircraft before they can even take off. It's not glorious, not the kind of dramatic dogfight that makes for good stories, but it's effective, and in war, effectiveness is all that matters. By October, the tide of the war in the Pacific has shifted noticeably. The Japanese are on the defensive, their once overwhelming numerical advantage whittled away by months of attrition. The new Hellcat fighters are arriving in greater numbers, giving American pilots an aircraft that can match the Zero in performance. But the Wildcat pilots are still flying, still fighting, their older aircraft made effective by superior tactics and ironclad discipline. Jim receives orders in early November, transferring him stateside to become an instructor at a fighter training school in California. Part of him is relieved. He's been in combat for 10 months, flown more than 80 missions, and survived encounters that should have killed him. Another part of him feels guilty about leaving his squadron, leaving the men who've become closer than brothers through shared danger. On his last night at Henderson Field, the squadron throws him a party of sorts. Someone scrounges up a bottle of whiskey, and they sit around a fire, swapping stories and lies, the way fighting men have done since wars began. Tommy, now a seasoned veteran despite his youth, raises a toast. To the skipper, who taught us how to survive and how to win. You're going to be a hell of an instructor, Marcus adds his own toast. To the tactics that kept us alive. May every pilot who faces the enemy learn what you taught us. Danny, his arm healed now, simply says, to staying alive and making the other bastards die for their country. They drink, and Jim looks at the faces around the fire. Some of these men won't survive the war. Statistics are cruel, and the odds eventually catch up with everyone. But he's given them the best chance he can, taught them the tactics and discipline that might keep them alive a little longer. The next morning, Jim climbs aboard a transport aircraft for the long flight back to Hawaii, then on to California. He looks out the window as Henderson Field drops away below him, the runway growing smaller and smaller until it's just a brown line in the green jungle. 4 slow Wildcats against Japan's deadliest fighters. They weren't supposed to win, but they did, through discipline, tactics, and the courage to face impossible odds without flinching. It wasn't magic. It wasn't luck. At least not entirely. It was training, trust, and the willingness to fight smart instead of fighting fair. The war in the Pacific would continue for nearly 2 more years, costing hundreds of thousands of lives on both sides. But on that August morning in 1943, 4 American pilots in obsolete fighters proved that superior tactics and iron discipline could overcome numerical superiority and more advanced aircraft. It was a lesson that would be taught to every new fighter pilot for the rest of the war and beyond. Jim's story would become part of the curriculum at fighter schools. His tactics would be analyzed, refined, and incorporated into official doctrine. The Thatch weave would save countless lives in the months and years to come. But Jim himself would always remember it simply as the day he and his men did their jobs, fought as a team, and came home alive. In war, sometimes that's the only victory that matters. Years later, after the war had ended and Jim had returned to civilian life, he would occasionally be asked about that fight. What did it feel like to be outnumbered more than 2 to 1? How did he keep his cool when death was seconds away? What made him think his tactics would work? His answer was always the same. I trusted my training. I trusted my wingmen. And I refused to fight the enemy on their terms. War isn't about being the best. It's about making your enemy fight your fight, not theirs. That's the only genius involved. Everything else is just trying to stay alive long enough to see tomorrow. The genius tactic wasn't just the Thatch weave itself, though that was crucial. It was the understanding that sometimes survival isn't about being faster or more agile or having the better aircraft. Sometimes it's about being smarter, more disciplined, and more willing to work as a team than your opponent. 4 slow Wildcats crushed Japan's deadliest fighters because they fought as one, protected each other, and made the enemy pay for every mistake. In the vast history of World War II, it was just one engagement among thousands. But for the 4 pilots who lived through it, and for the countless pilots who would later learn from their example, it was proof that tactics and discipline could overcome almost any odds. The Japanese Zero was a magnificent fighter, flown by skilled and courageous pilots. But on that day, American ingenuity, teamwork, and tactical brilliance proved superior. Jim Caldwell would eventually retire from the Navy as a captain, having served through the end of World War II and into the early years of the Cold War. Tommy Reeves would survive the war with 12 confirmed kills and return to become a commercial airline pilot. Marcus Webb would be shot down over the Philippines in 1944, but survive as a prisoner of war until liberation. Danny Kozlowski would die in action in early 1945, his Wildcat shot down during a strike on a Japanese airfield. War is cruel in its randomness, sparing some and taking others regardless of skill or courage. But the lessons learned in the skies over the Solomon Islands lived on. The Thatch weave became standard doctrine. The emphasis on mutual support and team tactics became the foundation of American fighter tactics for decades to come. And every pilot who learned those lessons owed a debt, whether they knew it or not, to 4 men in slow Wildcats who refused to quit when the odds were against them. This is the story of courage, certainly, but more than that, it's the story of intelligence overcoming raw power, of discipline defeating chaos, of teamwork triumphing over individual heroics. It's a reminder that wars are not won by heroes alone, but by ordinary men who do extraordinary things when the situation demands it. 4 slow Wildcats against 9 deadly Zeros. It shouldn't have worked, but it did. And that made all the difference.